Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So on this video we will be looking into how you can get started with Redux Toolkit. So by the end of this video you should have a clear understanding of how to create reducers and work with Redux Toolkit for the regular reducers and the asynchronous reducers as well. So we're going to look into two different examples. So if you guys enjoy the content on the channel, please give a thumbs up to the video and subscribe to the channel. And without further ado, let's get started. So before even jumping on into about the Redux toolkit, I want to show you guys an example um, to show you, like why do we need even, like the global state managers like Redux, right? So I have created a simple app using create react app script. So basically I did some cleanups, removing the test files, logos, those kind of stuff. So on my app.js file, I have three buttons. Right, let's see if I can make this smaller. Yep, I have three buttons. So basically increase counter button is going to increase the counter that I'm storing on my use state. Decrease counter is going to decrease the counter, and the reset counter is going to reset the counter to 0. And the reason the state is in app.js file is I want to show you guys, like what are the problems that we run into if we don't have a global state managers like Redux. So the use case is, so I have three children components, which is component1.js, component2.js, and component3.js. So what we want to achieve is I want to render that counter value, which we created on app.js on this component 3. So if we trace back to app.js, app.js does not know about component 3. This is a really generic example that you will run into. So what we need to do is, since app.js file only knows about component 1, we're going to have to start sending our counter data to component 1, and which in turn will send the data to component 2, and which in turn we will send the data to component 3, and at the end that counter will be rendered. So that's how we pass the data between the components through the use of props, right? And if you know React, it only provides a one-way data binding, meaning you can only pass the data from parent component to children components. I mean, you can do a workaround and say, all right, I think we can pass the data from children to parent through the use of functions, but that's not the actual case. You were just doing some sort of workaround. You can't directly pass, like data from children to parent. The only workaround is you can create a function definition on the parent component and pass that function onto the children component, and which children component will call, and that will mutate the data on the parent component. That's the only workaround, but that does not like scale well. There are a few use cases where you might have to do that, but on general approach you have to use Redux in that case. So let's see over here. So let's start by passing the counter so that we can see the counter value here. So I'm going to pass a counter. Counter equals to, it's going to be counter. So let's go to component 1. Let's copy this code, and it's going to pass that counter to the component 2, but over here we're going to have to destructure the counter. Oops, I misspelled it. So now we're going to have to go to component 2, and we're going to have to pass that to component 3. So let me copy that, and let's destructure here. Right, let's see if it renders the counter. Right, increase counter. Did I do it right? It's gonna go to component 1. Oops. And component 1 is gonna pass that counter to component 2. component 2 is going to pass that counter to component 3. Oh, the reason so we need to do is we need to add a curly braces here and just render the counter, and we do need counter here as well. Counter, just like that. Now what we are doing here is now every time we change the state from these buttons, it's going to change the counter on the app.js file. Through all of these data passing as props, it will eventually reach to component 3 where we are rendering the counter. I mean, it works, but if you look at the component 3, component 1 does not need to know about counter at all, right? Because it does not do anything related to counter. All it's doing is it's just taking that counter value and passing on to the children. Same for the component 2. It does not need to know about the counter. The only component that needs counter is component 3. So why, like, do all of these extra steps, right? So that's where, like, these global state managers like Redux come into play. So basically the concept is you're going to have some sort of store where you will put your global data, and that can be accessible by all of the components, like underneath that store. It doesn't matter. So you don't have to, like, do the prop, like pass the data through props. So by the way, if you don't know, all of these things where you are passing props after props, this is called prop drilling, because you're trying to drill down through the use of props. So now we know, like, why do we even need global state managers? Now we're going to start implementing it. So we're going to look into Redux Toolkit. So if you are, most of the times whenever people hear about Redux, they think, all right, there's a bunch of boilerplate code. I would rather use React Context API. I mean, if you have a smaller applications, then you can go around and use React Context API. But if you are trying to build something, like production ready app, Context API does not scale well, and you have to go through, like a Redux, and that's the reason, like, I wanted to make this video, because you don't need to get scared about Redux. It's, like, it's really simple. And even the Redux Toolkit, you will see, like, there's not boilerplate code at all. It's similar to React Context API in terms of code footprints, but you will achieve, like, all of the things that Redux gives you. So you want to go to your so we want to look into, like, official documentation of Redux Toolkit here. This is the page you will land on, and let's click on Get Started, and you want to go to Quick Start tab. Over here, we're gonna install a few packages first before we even get started. All right, let me open the new terminal here, and then, as it says, we're gonna need 2 dependencies for our Redux to work. One is going to be Redux.js Toolkit itself, and another one is React Redux. So you might be thinking, where is the actual Redux dependency? So Redux Toolkit is built on top of actual Redux. So that's why if you look at their GitHub repo, you're going to see Redux as a dependency. But we don't have to install that. As soon as we install Redux Toolkit, everything is going to come for us. I'm going to copy that script from there, come back to our project, and I'm going to install one more package, which is called Axios, where we will use to fetch the data from the public API, where it will spit out, like, random dog images, and we will use that as a part of our, like, asynchronous reducers later. Okay, let's go ahead and install that, and we're gonna follow the like the folder structure and convention, like that they provide on the official documentation itself. So first, before even adding, like getting into, like adding data to the store, first we need to set up the store, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So as mentioned in the documentation, in order to write a store, what's the general approach is you want to go to source and create a folder called app, and inside that folder you want to create a file called store.js. So keep in mind, this is a lowercase s. This is not a component. And here, we're gonna import a function which will set up a store for us. So we're gonna import configure store from Redux Toolkit. And here we're gonna do export const store equals to, we're going to call that function that we brought earlier, and inside this function you can pass a object, and it takes the object of reducer, and over here you will provide like all of your reducers. We don't have reducers right now, so we will just leave it as empty object. So that's it in terms of like what you need for your store setup. So once you are done with that, you need to go to the root of your component tree, so which in our case is index.js file. Over here, we're gonna bring, if you remember here, while installing the package, we installed React Redux tool, right? So we need to set up our provider and the store on our root label. So I'm gonna bring a few packages here. So I'm gonna bring in our provider from React Redux, and I'm gonna bring in this store.js file, like the store value, so that it set up the store properly. So let me do import store from, it's gonna be dot slash, go to app/store. So that will bring the store for me. So now once you have both of these imported, all you need to do is you want to go to the app like this render thing, and go there and just call this provider, and within that provider you want to wrap your app component. So whatever the component tree is underneath this app, all of the things will get access to our provider basically. Now if I come back here, it should complain, like we're gonna see the white screen, and if we inspect, so it should, I think it should say somewhere, like the store needs to be passed. So it's saying, like cannot read the property of undefined get state. The reason for that is because we haven't provided our store yet. So the reason, since we brought this store, right, which actually initializes our Redux project, we need to tell the provider, all right, this is the store that we're going to be using. So you can pass a prop called store, and just pass the store in there. Oops, no, yep, I think that should work. No, oh, this is not a self-closing. It should be like this. Now our app should work as is, but it says, like store does not have a valid reducer. So the reason for that is we haven't provided any reducers here, but that's fine. So now the interesting thing is, if you have a Redux tool extension installed, you want to go there. As you can see, it initialized our Redux store. It called this init function, which is good. So meaning, we have our store set up and we're good to go. So now the only thing left to do is start writing the reducers itself. So in order to write a reducer, what they suggest on the official documentation is, if we go back here, on Redux Toolkit, there is a concept called slice. So the slice refers to, the generic name for whatever the data that you're trying to store within your Redux store. Because your Redux store is basically an object with a bunch of information in it. Let's say if you are trying to store the data for a user on your store, you would name something like user slice. If you have something related to to-dos, then you will name something like to-do slice. So that's the concept. So in order to write all of those slices, you want to go to source and create a new folder called features. And within that features folder, you want to create a separate directory. So with our use case is going to be counter, right? So we're going to do counter. Oops, not that one. I think I created the file instead of the folder. Name it as features, and within that, oh, my bad, it's not features, it's counter. And within that counter, I'm gonna create a counter slice.js file. So this is where we will set up our reducers for our counter. In order to create a slice, there is a function called create slice that you can grab from Redux Toolkit. So let's go ahead and import that. Import or create slice from Redux Toolkit. Come back here. Now let's start by initializing our slice. So I wanted to export const. The name of the slice is going to be counter slice equals to, we're going to call that create slice function, and within that function you can pass a object. So there are a couple of things we need to add for the object. First is going to be the name. So what you want to name this slice, so we're going to say just a counter. And then the second one is the initial state. Let's say underneath this slice, what are the fields that you want to have and what are the default values for those. I'm just going to say initial state. It's going to complain because we haven't initialized the initial state. So I'm just going to do const initial state equals to, it's going to be an object and with the value of counter, which is going to start from 0. Now it should not complain. Right, now we have our initial state. Now we're going to have to write a bunch of actions where we want to mutate the data, right? Because what we are trying to do is we want to have the ability to increase, decrease, and reset the counter. Now let's do that. So in order to add the actions, there is a field called reducers, and you can pass an object, and over here you will write your various actions. Let's say I want to write an action for whenever user clicks on this increase counter function, increase counter button, right? So I'm going to name my action as increment, and you can pass a function with this current state, and you can mutate the data within this function. So I'm just going to have an arrow function, and it's going to take the state as argument. So whenever we use this action, what we will do is we will take the current state, which is the current counter, and increase it by 1. So to do that, I want to grab state dot, since this state is an object itself, and we have a property called counter over there, counter, and I just want to do plus equals to 1. So what this will do is every time we use this action, which is increment, it's going to grab the state and grab the counter property out of it and just do a counter plus 1. So it's going to be the similar thing for decrement as well, because all we will do there is just subtract 1 from it. Let me copy that into decrement, but over here instead of plus, it's going to say -1. And I'm going to have another counter, another action, which is going to be the reset action. That's for the third button that we have. It's going to, what it's going to do is, the only thing it's going to do is, we don't even need this because we're not incrementing or decrementing. All we need to do is set up the state to initial state. So basically it will just make the counter to 0. That's it in terms of all of our reducers. So since we are not handling asynchronous reducers in this case, all of our fields should be good enough. So if you want to have asynchronous data, there is a field called extra reducer, so which we will look in the later part of the video once we wrap up this counter example. All right, now our slice is done. So one thing left to do is export these. So the exporting syntax might be a little bit funky over here because we're gonna have to use 2 different exports for actions and the reducers. So but once you get the hang of it, you will get used to it. I wanted to export const, and in order to pass all of these actions, you're gonna have to pass it within the object. So I'm gonna copy that. It's gonna be increment, and I will pass decrement as well, and I'm gonna have to pass the I'm going to have to pass that reset action as well. So once you have your object set up, you want to do equals to and call the name of the slice, which in this case is counter slice dot actions. So that will make sure all of our these actions are like exported. We're gonna have to do one more export to export our reducer itself. So which is this. We're gonna have to do export default counter slice dot reducer. So once you do that, our counter slice is ready. So this is all you need. Like it has the same functionality that we're doing over here every time we call these actions, and all we need to do is go back to store.js file, because after you create these slices, you're gonna have to add it to the store too, right? So we're gonna do that now. So I want to import counter slice from features counter slice. So now here, the only thing left to do is inside the reducers object, just add counter is going to be counter slice. So as soon as I did that, if we come back to our Redux step tool, as you can see, now we have a data on our Redux tool, which is the counter itself. So this is really cool. So if you are if you were used to or using Redux, to achieve this, you're gonna have to write. I'm telling you that you're gonna have to write a bunch of code in here. As you can see, we just set up our Redux store and even added the data within a really short amount of time with a really less amount of code. All right, now since our data is in the store and everything is set up and ready, now the only thing left to do is start making a change right on the Redux store, because now every time we increase or decrease the counter, what we wanna do is we wanna basically make a change to our store so that we don't have to pass the data as props. So let's go to app.js file. So in order to use those actions, right, increment, decrement, and reset, first we're gonna have to import those. So I'm gonna import increment, decrement, and reset. It's gonna come from dot slash. So where are we? Dot slash features. Oops. Features slash counter slice. So that's where we're gonna grab our data from. All right. So before even working on making a call to these actions or reducers, I want to explain you guys something regarding the hooks. So we're going to use two different hooks here. So one is going to be use dispatch, one is going to be use selector. So what do they do? So the use dispatch hook is responsible for making a change within your store. Basically, if you want to make some kind of changes or if you want to run some sort of actions, you're going to use dispatch hook. And the use selector hook is responsible to make to grab the data from your Redux store. That's it. That's the only thing that you need to know. Use dispatch will mutate the data on the store. Use selector will help us to grab the data from the store. All right, so before even grabbing the data, first we need to know how to make the change. So I'm going to import use dispatch from React dash Redux. Let's do that. So right underneath here, I'm going to do const dispatch equals to use dispatch. All right, now we have our dispatch ready. So every time we do onClick, we don't want to call the set counter. Rather, what we want to do is just call this dispatch, right, to make a change to the our Redux store, and the action that we're going to use is increment. So let's get rid of this. and let's have a callback function here. And all we will do is, the way to call the dispatch is you're just gonna do dispatch and just write the name of the reducer, which is gonna be increment. And just like that, I think if we did everything correctly, if I increase the counter, I should see the counter being increased on our Redux. So right now it's 0. So let's do that. As you can see, it ran this code, but I don't know why it didn't refresh automatically. Let me inspect it again. Let's refresh, and let's say if I increase the counter, as you can see, it ran this counter slash increment action, which we increase the counter to 1. So if I keep on doing that, it's just gonna keep on increasing the counter on our store. So our store is able to increase our counter. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do the similar thing for decrease, but in this case I'm just going to copy this snippet, use dispatch increment. We're not going to use increment, but I don't want it to write that dispatch again. So let's copy that decrement, because every time we decrease the counter we want to run this decrement. But what is going on here? I think we are missing a parenthesis. Okay, that should be good. Okay, let's refresh this. Increase counter is working. Decrease counter is working as well. As you can see, it is correctly decreasing the counter in our Redux store. Sweet. Now the only thing left to do is to make sure we reset the counter. So I'm just gonna grab this code again, back here, copy paste, and call this reset. So what this reset will do is it will reset the counter to 0. Okay, now let's increase the counter. It's increasing the counter. It's decreasing correctly too. Now if I click on reset, it's going to reset that run that reset action, and now our counter is 0. So now we don't need to, we can get rid of this counter variable from here. Let's get rid of that. Now I want to go to component 1. Let's get rid of this counter from here, and we don't need this prop as well. Let's go to component 2, get rid of this counter prop. We don't need to pass that counter here as well. Let's go to component 3. We don't need props here, and now this is the place where we want to grab the data of counter. Basically I'll just leave it as is for now, as we're going to use that counter, like the same name, so it's going to error out for a few seconds, but it's fine. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to use use selector hook to grab the data from our store. So over here I'm going to bring that hook. I'm going to import use selector from React Redux. Alright, now so how do we use our use selector hook? So basically the way to use it is I'm going to do const, and I'm going to destructure an object. I'll show you guys in a second what I'm destructuring, but on the right hand side you're just going to call use selector, and within that use selector hook you can pass a function with the state as argument. So we're going to do state arrow function, and I can access all of it. If I do state dot, so basically what it's saying is if I just do state, it's going into our Redux store and it's grabbing all of the object. The object that we're actually interested in is in the counter, right? So what I need to do is I just need to do state dot counter. And another thing, what I'm destructuring over here. So as soon as I do state dot counter, I'm into this block, basically the top level block where there is a counter, and the field that I'm trying, interested in is the counter itself. So if I just replace this counter here, our code should be as is. As you can see, it's 0 right now. The reason is our counter is 0 on our store. Let's refresh this. So now if we coded everything correctly, our functionalities should be the same as like previously when we started, where we are using these things as a props. Now what we will do is I will increase the counter, as you can see, it correctly increases the counter, but we are not passing it as props anymore. We are grabbing it from the Redux. And I want to decrease counter. It's working as well, but this Redux is not refreshing properly. I don't know why my dev tool is running really slow today. But you got the point. I can increase, I can decrease, I can reset, just like that without any problem. Now we don't have to do that prop trailing anymore. Alright, I think that was it in terms of the regular reducers. So now what I want to do is I want to show you guys the asynchronous reducers. So basically what it's going to do is we're going to have a button over here which says fetch docs data, and as soon as that is called, we're going to dispatch an action like we did for the counters, but that's going to be an asynchronous action because we are trying to fetch the data from API. And once we get the data from the API, we're going to create a separate component underneath our source called let's say images.js, and that will render all of our docs images. Right, let's go ahead and start writing the code for that one. So let me close these tabs because I don't think we need these anymore. Index.js, we don't need them. Counter, nope. We can close the store for now as well. We're gonna use it later on. So, oh, I forgot to remove this code. We don't need the use state anymore. Let's do a little bit of cleanup. All right, now let's go ahead and create a button. It's just gonna say fetch docs data. So this button is gonna be responsible to fetch the docs data, and let's go ahead and create a new folder in our source so that we can write the service files. We create a new folder called services. Over here I'm just gonna say, oops, inside the not features, inside the services, we want to do fetch docs.js file. So this is where we will write our function which will actually fetch the data using Axios. So I'm going to bring in Axios from Axios, and let me copy the base URL over here. So this is just a public URL which sends you the random dog images, and we're gonna write a function here which will just call the get method on this URL and get the data out of it and just return that data. So let's write that function. I'm just gonna say const fetch images equals to it's gonna be an asynchronous function, and we're not gonna have any parameters or arguments there. So let's do an arrow function, and all it's gonna do is I'm gonna do const response equals to await, and we're gonna use that Axios dot get, and here we're going to provide the base URL. So what this will do is Axios will call the get method, get HTTP method on this base URL itself. So once this is successful, we are awaiting this because it might take some time. And from here, all we need to do is just return response dot. So whenever you fetch the data from Axios, your actual data is inside the response.data object. So you want to call that response.data, and we are just returning it. You can just simply return the function from here, but what I like to do is, let's say if you have a bunch of the similar functions here, how do you make it scalable? So what I like to do is I like to create a new object. I'm just gonna say dog service equals to object, and within that object I pass that function in there. And from here, I'm just going to do export default on dog. It should be dog service. sounds really a little bit weird, right? When you say dog service, and normally it's service dogs. I don't know, I just thought about that. So the reason for that, like why I did that, right? Let's say you had something like a fetch dog's name function over here. At that time, all you needed to do was just grab that fetch dog's name and pass it as an object. So everywhere you import this, you can just do dog service dot fetch images, or like dog service dot whatever the other functions you might have. So it makes the code a little bit cleaner whenever you're trying to import it. So you don't have to import like individual name. That's the reason. All right, I think we are done with our service file too. Now we can close that one. Now, in order for our dogs data, we're gonna add that on the store as well. So if you remember, if there is a separate data, then we're gonna create a separate slice. So I want to go to features and I want to create a folder called dog. And within that folder, I'm going to create a file called dogslice.js. Let me close this one. And here we're going to write all of our reducers and actions for fetching our dogs images. So let's go ahead and import few functions from here. So we're gonna have to import create slice, that's for sure, because we need that to create a slice. And if you're trying to do some sort of asynchronous action, you're gonna have to bring in create async thunk from Redux Toolkit. So this create async thunk is going to be really handy function for us to handle our asynchronous actions. All right, now we want to do what we want to do is we want to start creating our slice. So we want to do export const fetch dogs data equals to, oops, not export dogs data, it should be dog slice, not fetch dogs data. It should be const dogs, let's make a singular, dog slice equals to, we're going to call that create slice and pass the object in there. As we know from earlier example, it's going to take a name, which in this case we will just name it as dog, and it's going to take a initial state. We don't have initial state, so let's go ahead and import that. Not import, like write a definition for that. It's going to be a object. So for this object, I will have a few of the states. So what do I want to have is, I want to have is loading state, because I want to like show it something on the UI based on all of the states during this asynchronous operation. So I want to do a false for is loading, and I want to have is success to false as well. So meaning like if this is responsible whenever we are successful in fetching the data. I will have one more flag. It's going to be is error. So if the promise is rejected, then we're going to have this, we're going to make a use of this flag. And whenever you call that a docs image URL, they send you the image URL itself for us to, which would help us to render the images. So I'm going to grab that image URL. It's going to be an empty string. And we're going to display some error message if we can't fetch the data from the URL. So I think that's it in terms of like all of the state that we need. Alright, so now let's start by writing reducers. I'm just going to call this reducers and pass the object in there. On the regular reducers, we're only going to have one reducer, which is going to be a reset. And all it's going to do is it's going to set up this store to previous, or like our initial state, basically, like we did on our counter example. So let's do reset. Takes a function. Man, I don't know why it does that. Error function, and I can just call the initial state here. Right. So now I think that should be it in terms of our regular state. Regular reducers. Now In order to make a use of asynchronous reducers, you can't put those on your regular reducers. Rather, you want to have, there is a property called extra reducers. This is where you will handle all of your cases for your asynchronous action. Right now, let's just leave it as empty object, because what I want to do is I want to write a function first and then write a separate cases and then write the reducer for those. So I want to come back here and I want to bring in that service file that we created right earlier, where we run the Axios to fetch the docs data. I want to grab this docs service. So I'm going to go on the top and import docs service from services/docs or fetch docs. And I'm going to write a function here. I'm going to do export const fetch docs data equals to. Over here, we're going to use this create async thonk function. And this will be responsible to handle different cases like pending, success, or rejected cases. So I want to grab that. And over here, it takes two arguments. One is going to be the name of the action that you want to run, and the second one is the function where you will do like data fetching. So I'll just do dogs/images as my name, and I will have a asynchronous function as a second argument. So on this asynchronous function that you're about to write, it takes a couple of arguments. Let's say on our fetch data docs or something, like if we had some sort of a service file where it used to take the parameter, this is the place to put it in as a parameter. So if your service call requires params, and whenever you're dispatching this action, if you need some sort of input from the user before making a call, it goes as a first argument. Since we're not going to have any arguments at all, what do I need to do is, if you just want to negate that or ignore that, just put the underscore in here and just do comma. So meaning that we're not going to provide anything on our first argument. Once you do that, for the second argument, there is a property called thonk API. So this will help us to reject our promises. And just do the arrow function, and over here we're going to write the definition. So since we are dealing with asynchronous action, we're going to have a try catch block. And let's write the case for our try block. So we're going to try to, within the try block, we will just call this doc service that we imported. So I just want to do return await. We want to await because this is the asynchronous action. I want to call the doc service service dot. If let's go back here, and from the doc service I want to grab this, right? This function fetch images, and it's not going to take any arguments. That's it. If there was, for example, if there was some sort of data that you needed, all you need to do was add it as an argument and just provide it here, just like that. But in our case, we're not going to take any arguments. So I just wanted to show you guys how do you do that. All right, let's say if our request was rejected, or we couldn't fetch the data, we want to handle it properly. So I want to do const error message equals to error, nope, not error. Just want to do could not fetch images. And at the end, after you declare whatever you want to have a message, because I'm writing this message because this public API does not return the correct or the good error message. So if you have your own services and if you have correct messages that's come from the backend, then you can just simply use that. Now what we want to do is we want to return, and we want to call that thonk API that I brought in as a second argument. And there is a property called reject with value. And the value is going to be our error message. All right, that's it in terms of like our create async thunk function. So once you do that, the only thing left to do is handle our various cases. So meaning whenever we call this with docs data, we can have various states, right? Let's say if you're making a call, you can have a pending state where you are waiting for the data to come back. And if you have a success state, then after pending, you're going to have, once you get the data, that is going to be your success case. And if you don't manage to get the data, or like there was something wrong with the request, it's going to go to the error case, which is going to be the rejected state. So we're going to have to handle that like individually on our extra reducer. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to come back here on our extra reducers. The extra reducer takes a function with the property of builder, and we're going to write an arrow function here. And within this builder, within this function, we're going to have various cases. So in order to write a cases, we're going to call the builder. I want to write it on the new line, and do dot add case. So what this add case will do is we can add various cases like we discussed earlier: pending, fulfilled, and rejected. So the thing that we are trying to write case on is the fetch docs data, right? So let's write a case for pending state. You want to go to your add case and just call that function dot pending, meaning while we are in the state where we just made a call but we haven't got the response yet. As a second argument, you can pass a function, and over here you will make all of the necessary changes that you need to. So whenever we are on the waiting state, the only thing that is responsible in our waiting state is going to be is loading state, right? So we're going to make some changes to that. So what I want to do is state dot is loading to true. So let me give you an example, not example, or explaining this. So whatever the reducer that deals with the asynchronous action, it goes inside extra reducers. So we already set up our create async thunk function. So only thing left to do was handle three different cases. So one is going to be pending, one is going to be fulfilled, and one is going to be rejected case. So in order to add those cases, you're going to have to go to extra reducer, which takes a function as a like a function with the builder as an argument. And within that function, you're going to call that builder dot add case function, and you're going to keep on chaining this like cases until all of your states are done. So since we handle the pending state, we're going to have to handle the fulfilled case, right, which is the success case. So in order to chain it up, we're going to call this add case again. As a first argument, we're going to fetch docs data dot fulfill, meaning we got the correct response back, and call the, as a second argument, call the function. But if we manage to get the data, we're going to have to get the actions as well, because we're going to get the data, right, which comes from the action.payload. Alright, so if this is the case, then we're going to do state dot, you know what, let me copy a snippet of code, and I'll I think I can write it. So let's say if the request was fulfilled, I want to have state dot is loading to false, meaning we're not fetching the data anymore, and state dot is success is going to be true, meaning like we correctly got the data. State dot image URL is going to be access dot payload dot message. The reason for that is if I go back here, I think we can close this one. So if I call this public URL, right, the reason I did this is this action.payload gives me this entire object. But if you look here, there's a property called message, and I'm trying to grab that message property which contains the image URL for the docs data. So that's why I'm doing actions.payload.message. All right, now, so our image URL is done, and then now I want to do state dot is error. I want to mark that as false because this is not an error state, and I want to do state dot error message is going to be a empty string because we don't need to show the error message. Well, just like that, our whenever our API calls is successful, our case is done. All right, let's go ahead and add the final case, which is going to be the rejected case. So I'm just going to do fetch docs data dot rejected, and as a second argument it takes state and action, and here we're gonna do state dot is loading and state dot is success. So loading is false, its success is going to be false as well, and then state dot image URL. Oops, I can't copy. So for the state.image URL, it's going to be an empty string because we couldn't fetch the data. And then state.isError, it's going to be true because we couldn't fetch the data. And state.error message, it's going to come in action.payload. Oh, it's actions.payload, not action. So this is coming from right here. We were rejecting with the value, that's why we get that as a part of payload. So if I'm not wrong, I think that's it in terms of our final case. Now the only thing left to do, if we did everything correctly, is to export it, and it should work just fine. So let's come back here. So let's export our reducer, export const. We're going to export reset, which is the regular reducers. It's going to come from .slice.actions, and we're going to export default .slice.reducer. And you don't have to export extra reducers. So as soon as you do that .slice.reducer, it's good enough. All right, let's do, okay, so what do we want to do now? So since we completed our slice, the only thing left to do, because we're not seeing it on the store itself until now, the reason for that is we haven't added that as a part of our store. So we want to go to store.js file, and we want to bring in that .slice. So I'm going to do import .slice from features .slice. And here we want to add dog, and that's going to be a dog slice. So as soon as I save that, I should see the store with all of the docs information in it, with these generally like initial state is loading, is success, is error, image URL, error message. Right, this is cool. Now the only thing left to do is start implementing it. Okay, what do I want to do now is, all right, what's next? I think we want to go to app.js file, and there we will dispatch a few actions so that we can fetch the docs data. All right, now over here, do we want to dispatch? Yeah. Let's just, because we have this button right here, right? As soon as we click that, we want to dispatch the action. So I'm going to have to bring in a few things from the slice that we just created earlier. So it's going to be import fetch docs data from dot slash features slash dog slash dog slice. Did we rename as fetch dogs data, or what did we name? So the function that you want to call is this one right here, fetch dogs data. Just want to make sure like I did the right. All right, we also need to bring in our reset reducer. We'll do reset, and I think it's gonna complain because we have the same name over here and here. So I can make a change to this name as I want to do a reset as reset docs data. That should work. All right, now I'm gonna have an on-click handler. To on-click equals to fetch data. It's gonna complain it's not defined, so that's fine. From here, const fetch data equals to, over here we're gonna try to fetch the data, right? So in order to fetch the data, all we need to do is if you remember, we're gonna use dispatch to make a change to our actions. We're gonna do the same thing for the asynchronous action as well, and we're just gonna call that fetch docs data. All right, now once we are able to like dispatch that action, I'm gonna run this dispatch again with the reset docs data, so that after we fetch the data, it does the cleaning part. Oops, oh, I don't want to do the cleanup after I fetch the data. I want to do the cleanup before I fetch the data. Sorry, because it's just gonna mess up everything otherwise. All right, let's test it out. So if we go to network, there's nothing in there. So hopefully we did everything right. So if I click on fetch data, if all of our logic was good, it should try to fetch the data and populate the correct fields here. All right, looks like it did. It went on a pending state as soon as we first it went on reset because we resetted the data, and it went on a pending state when the request was going through, and finally it went to fulfill state, and it gave me the image URL. So this is the image URL that we need to fetch our data. So what I want to do now is I want to create a separate component to render the images. And once we're done with that, I think we're done with the video too. So I want to create a file called image.js. I want to do RAFCE so that it gives me the boilerplate code. And over here, all this component will do is it will render the dog images. So in order to grab something from Redux Store, you're gonna have to bring use selector from React Redux. And here I'm going to initialize that selector equals to use selector. It's going to take a state, and within that, the thing that I'm interested in is state.dog. So that should give me access to all of the fields what we have over here, all of these objects. So from here, I need a few things. So I'm going to grab is loading, and then is success, because I want to display something in the UI based on our states. Success, and is error image URL, and then I want to grab error message. Alright, so we should have access to all of our data from the Redux. And now only thing left to do is let's get rid of this return statement from here. And then what we will do is I'm going to copy a snippet of code. So what I'm doing here is if we are in the loading state, meaning which the loading state will be true when the request or like our action is in pending state, at that time we will show h1 tag with loading state on the UI. Alright, if we are in, let's say we are in the success state, that is success. If that's the case, then I will do a direct return. and within that direct return I'm gonna have a div. Within that div I'm gonna have a image tag. So I want to have, what do I have? I want to have source for sure. Source is going to be the image URL, because we add that source image right there, and we're going to have to provide the alt tag as well. It's going to say dog, and just to make sure like it does not take the entire width from the screen, I'm going to add a style tag as well. Just making sure like it's 200 by 200 in size. Alright, our success case is done as well. Now we're gonna have to handle our failure cases. So for that we're just gonna call if is error. Then we're gonna do the direct return and have a div. Within that div I'm gonna have a h1 with the error message, because we add the error message on this field right there, right? So if I'm not wrong, everything should be good from our image side. So now one thing left to do is come back to app.js file, bring that component here, import image from image, and at the end I will just render that. Alright, now let's see if it worked. So now what should happen is, as soon as we click this fetch docs data button, it should run these actions, and based on that it should update the store, and it should give us the correct it should render all of the correct statuses based on the what we have on the state. So let's see. Now let's click on fetch docs data. As you can see, it correctly rendered the image. So let me do that again. It goes for, like if you see it here, it goes for a split second with furthest loading screen that is on the pending state basically. So basically you don't want to have like loading like h1 tag. You want to use some sort of spinner here, and you will have some sort of good message. But I just wanted to show you like all of the states that you can manage. It works like just like that. And now let's check the failure case, right? Because all of the things that we are doing here is all of the fulfilled case. So let's make this service call fail by changing the URL. Now since I'm putting the wrong URL, it should fail. Loading state, as you can see, it says could not fetch images, and over here it goes to pending and it goes to rejected. And within the rejected, since we're rejecting with the value, it adds the error message as could not fetch images. It goes same again, so let's redo that. So now it should fetch the docs images. Alright, I think that should be it, guys. So in this video we learned about like the regular reducers, asynchronous reducers. So if you saw this or like you followed this tutorial, it's not that like tough like in terms of setting up the Redux toolkit. So I would recommend, rather than using jumping into Redux, basically you can do everything you want, like from what you want to do from the Redux, you can do it in Redux toolkit. And for the asynchronous action, they also have RTK query, if I'm not wrong. So I might as well do a video in the future on that one. It's solely based on like the API calls, but like this is a really lightweight package built on top of React, and this is a really cool concept, and I see like great future on this Redux toolkit. So I would ask you guys to like take a look into it, and their official documentation is quite easy as well. Alright guys, I think this video provided you some sort of value. So if you think so, and if you want to see more of these contents in the future, please give a thumbs up to the video, so it will help me a lot. And please consider subscribing to the channel, and I will see you guys in the future videos. Thanks.